Mr. Larry. You're the boss, man. Call this meeting to order. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right. Well, first on the agenda, comments and statements from the public. No one here yet. Mr. Sullivan, any comments or statements? So the informational agenda, review and comparison of the organizational charts. Dr. Colley, you want to say something?
At one point in time, we had an organizational chart that was outdated. We decided to not use it anymore. We had taken it out of the policy. Some people felt that that wasn't a good idea, that there should be an organizational chart for those people who kind of wanted to see how the school district was organized. We've played with a few models. This seems to be one that fits as close as you can imagine. Putting something in paper that makes some interconnection between roles that we have in the district and people that we have in the district. The problem has always been that from time to time you have misunderstandings of how many people we have in administration or at the top, if you will, versus how many people are really doing the job and what jobs those are. So one of the things we did is we looked at several other charts from other districts, and we looked at what were the most common roles designated in these kind of organizational charts. Based on that, we took a look at those areas that, for example, two people are sharing the same role. And then, we wanted to make sure that people understood that concept. So we gave you two of them. One that would be more generic, that's kind of what you would put on the front of a brochure or into the policy. You really don't want to put names in a policy because every time somebody changes roles, you have to change the policy. So you have the generic one without names, and then you have the one that has names, just to show that in any other district you would have additional roles, but that in this district you may have the same person, or you'll see the same name, in two different roles. So you have, for example, the superintendent and the business manager being the same person. And unfortunately, those are some of the decisions that have historically been made in this district. So you end up with this kind of architecture to the organization of the system. So you have a little key there. The square or squarish boxes are people who have some kind of administrative role. Those are real people, if you will. The secondary roles are in diamonds, a little clearer shaded. And those are roles that other people assume have to, because we need to report to the state and we need to do stuff that the state requires us to do. And somebody has to do it, so they've been assigned to specific people within the organization.
Dr. Colley, on the second page here, the one with the names.
Mm-hmm.
Under Director of Guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Tudelo, Lewis, Dargan, and yourself. How does that?
The problem is there are certain things that you have to do in order to coordinate a guidance program K through 12, and we don't have a specific person, whereas a few years ago, if you remember, we had a high school guidance director that we also assigned other duties to basically coordinate with the other schools and the guidance counselors in those schools. That position was eliminated the first round of cuts 2 years ago. And therefore, you have the high school principal taking a lot of those roles that were more specific to the high school. You have myself and Dr. Dargan trying to coordinate between the schools, the guidance program, and you have Beth trying to do a lot of the reporting that was required of that position. So that's what I'm saying, when you see a bunch of names, is we took whatever the responsibilities that were under that role, and we just spread them out to people who, for lack of a better term, were still left standing.
And I don't know how you can, I mean, it'd be a subjective answer, but typically in the school system, even of our size, these positions would have bodies associated with them?
It depends. In some districts, you would have one position and not others. Small districts tend to share positions or hire part-time people. So I've seen small districts, for example, have a part-time business administrator, although, you know, having been a part of MASBO for a few years, I know they don't like that, because it always happens that the day they have a crisis is the day the person's not scheduled to be there. I think the towns have seen that a few times now. With a part-time town administrator, you see those kind of things where questions get asked and the person's just not available because they're not scheduled to be there.
Tony?
Yep.
Chair. Mike, you go ahead.
No, you were first.
Dr. Colley, we've taken some of these levels down 2 or 3 steps. I'd like to make a friendly amendment, if possible, to take the nurse leader and break that down into 3 legs from there, from West High School and middle school nurses, just to finish off that leg of that there.
The only reason why we didn't do there is because we didn't put the staff that were not in supervisory roles. She doesn't really have a supervisory role. She does have a supervisory role. Let's stop there for a minute. We didn't put the people who were being supervised in there, because then people would say, okay, so who does the principal supervise? Who does the director of special ed supervise? And you'd have a lot of cross-contamination, because
Well, they do need to know what their chain of command is, to where if they have a problem, they go to their nurse leader then until goes to you. So they do need to know what their chain of command is. It goes up and down.
then we would have to make this very complicated, because you're gonna have people like special ed people who are gonna have the principal, in some cases, the director of special ed, in some cases, the assistant superintendent, depending on which part of the role is.
An
We can do
organizational
that.
chart should take it down to being absolutely easy. It's gonna make it easier for people to understand what their chain of command is. If they have a problem, they go up the ladder rather than sideways and
Well,
diagonally.
my point is, in some cases, there is more than one person they answer to, depending on what part of their role we're talking about. That's my concern, is you're gonna have certain groups of teachers or staff being responsible to different people who are administrators, depending on what we're talking about. We're talking about curriculum, that we're responsible to Dr. Dargan. We're talking about the school's calendar or schedule, that we're responsible to the principal. If we're talking about, you know, fulfilling the requirements of an IEP, they may be responsible to Ann Harkin. So if we start putting the rank and file, this is gonna get real messy real quick, but we can do that.
It just, every military organizational chart I've ever been associated with, even in the police departments, you get down as far as detail as possible, because it does make things easier to understand when good things and bad things happen. Not saying put names. If someone's a .8 and one thing and a .2, they know if they have their .8 a problem, they know who they report to. And if something does happen, we can identify a lot easier when there's a breakdown in the system at where it broke down at. It makes it easier on our part to find out what's going on the ground, boots on the ground. If you have an organizational chart, we can track an individual where it's coming from. Right now, they just report to whomever.
Ann, go ahead.
Just under every form, 1993, the principal ultimately is responsible
For the buildings.
everybody in his or her building.
Yes.
So it's really a shared supervisory position. Same with the custodians, same with, maintenance. It's shared supervisory.
Well, the reason why I brought that up is that's exactly, I'm glad you brought that up, because through Ed Reform of '93, we have positions being filled in different schools, and it comes back to the hiring practices. The building administrators need to handle their buildings. And that's still not being done. And that's why an organizational chart will tell you who's handling that building.
And as I said, under ed reform, the principal is responsible for hiring and firing, subject to the approval of the superintendent.
Yes.
Mike?
A couple of comments on the two charts before us, a question, and then possibly even a motion, if there's no one else to be heard from. With that explanation, I'm seeing a possible expanded chart that would have the nurses reporting through the building administrators, and we could, in fact, extend every employee someplace along a chart. But, here in front of us, we have a updated organizational chart. Couple of questions I have with the top copy. By the way, I like the idea that, because I have some problems with some of the names and some of the display assignments, so I would consider a motion that, this isn't in the form of motion yet, but acceptance of the top copy, which shows the organization by position, and in fact, if one person is involved with other areas, we can amend it to second and third backup charts. But right now, we have a blank in our policy manual. I believe the one we have a copy of is the most recent. In our packet, there was a Westport Community Schools organizational and map, and it starts with the parents, students, and community, goes down to the school committee, superintendent of schools. I assume that came out of pre.
No, this is a recent chart, isn't it, Dr. Collins?
The map, you're talking about this one?
Yes.
It was actually very old,
Yes.
but it was in the,
Updated.
no, we never got to update it. We just simply said, it's not current, let's get it out. It had things like
Correct. So now we have an updated.
deans and things of that.
And I
Yeah.
think that this top copy is a representation of what the superintendent sees as the corporate chart. This is outdated, so I think we should accept this as it is, the top copy. And the only questions I have on that copy is student manager and systems coordinator. Is one of the blue diamonds under technology director? What is that? Is that
A lot of systems, when they introduce EPIMS and SIMS, EPIMS is basically the system that the state uses for reporting on all personnel, from custodians to teachers to TAs to secretaries to the superintendent. The state collects about 30 or 40 informational items on each person year to year. To the teachers, it goes all the way to what classes they're teaching for how long, what period, what semester. There's a person assigned to track that. So in a bigger system, you may have an individual who does just that. You also have many places that have gone to a single person that does the data collection and reporting for student information. We collect over 35 elements for each student, and it gets updated yearly, and the state basically tracks